Her hand trembled as the deep crimson wine filled the crystal goblet, 2 drops of pure nightshade, enough to kill Chicago's most ruthless crime lord. But when Damian Moretti raised the glass, he didn't choke. He met her terrified eyes, smiled coldly and whispered, "Drink it with me, future wife." Charlotte Jenkins was not the kind of woman who belonged in the criminal underworld. She was a 28-year-old sous chef with a brilliant palate, a laugh that usually filled the room, and a body that took up space. At 250 pounds, she was softly curved, unapologetically fat, and accustomed to the way high society types let their eyes slide right past her. To the billionaires, politicians, and mobsters who frequented the Grand Astoria Hotel, a plus-size woman in a stark white chef's coat was practically invisible. She was just the help, just a piece of the furniture that made the magic happen on their plates. Tonight, her invisibility was the only weapon she had. The heat of the commercial kitchen was suffocating, thick with the scent of roasted garlic-seared lamb and white truffle oil. Head chef Arthur Rossi was screaming orders at the line cooks, but Charlotte couldn't hear a word over the rushing blood in her ears. Hidden deep inside the pocket of her checkered chef's pants was a small glass vial. Her younger brother, Lucas Jenkins, was a fool. A sweet, well-meaning fool who thought he could outsmart the underground poker tables run by the Morello family. Now Lucas owed $200,000 to Anthony Morello, a man who collected debts in bone fragments and blood. 3 days ago, Morello's top enforcer, Dominic Castiglione, had cornered Charlotte in the alleyway behind her apartment. He hadn't asked for money. He had handed her the vial. "Damian Moretti is dining in the VIP room on Friday," Dominic had growled, pressing the cold glass into her palm. "Put this in his private reserve Pinot Noir. You do this, your brother walks. You don't, and I mail Lucas to you in a shoebox." Damian Moretti. The name alone was enough to drop the temperature in any room. He was the reigning head of the Moretti Syndicate, a cold, calculating boss who had ruthlessly expanded his empire across the Midwest. He was 32, brutally handsome, and famously paranoid. He didn't trust easily, which was why he only drank from a specific sealed bottle of wine kept in the Astoria's cellar, a bottle Charlotte had access to. "Jenkins," Chef Rossi barked, snapping her back to reality. "The rack of lamb for table 1 is ready. Bring out the Moretti reserve, and don't mess it up, or we're all dead." Charlotte swallowed hard, her throat feeling like sandpaper. "Yes, chef." She walked toward the heavy oak doors of the wine cellar, her thick thighs brushing together beneath her apron, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. Every step felt like a march to her own execution. She loved her brother, but she was no killer. She baked brioche. She whipped up mascarpone cream. She didn't end lives. Once inside the dimly lit cellar, she located the bottle, a 1990 Domaine de la Romane Conti. Her hands shook violently as she uncorked it using the hotel's specialized opener. The cork popped with a soft, hollow thud that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Charlotte pulled the vial from her pocket. The liquid inside was completely clear, tasteless, odorless, a highly concentrated paralytic toxin. "If I do this, I am a murderer," she thought, tears prickling the corners of her eyes. "If I don't, Lucas is dead." A sob caught in her throat. She closed her eyes silently, apologizing to whatever God was watching, and tipped the vial over the neck of the bottle. 3 drops. That was all it took. She quickly resealed it, placing it carefully onto a silver serving tray alongside a single polished crystal goblet. The walk from the kitchen to the VIP dining room was a blur. The heavy double doors were guarded by 2 massive men in tailored Italian suits. They barely glanced at her. To them, she was just a plump, sweating kitchen worker. "Wine for Mr. Moretti," she murmured, her voice trembling. One of the guards patted down her apron quickly, completely missing the empty vial still in her pocket, and opened the door. The VIP room was lavish, draped in dark velvet and smelling of expensive cigars. Sitting at the head of the long mahogany table was Damien Moretti. He was an intimidating figure, broad shoulders, encased in a charcoal bespoke suit, sharp jawline, and eyes as dark and cold as obsidian. He was in the middle of a low conversation with his underboss, Matteo Bianchi, but the moment Charlotte stepped into the room, the conversation died. "Ah, the reserve," Damien said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. "Pour it." Charlotte approached his side. Her hands were shaking so badly that the bottle rattled against the rim of the crystal goblet as she poured. The deep crimson liquid swirled in the glass, hiding its deadly secret perfectly. She stepped back, clutching the silver tray to her chest like a shield. "Drink it," she prayed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Just drink it, and let this nightmare be over." Damien picked up the glass by the stem. He swirled it slowly, watching the legs of the wine streak down the crystal. He lifted it to his nose and inhaled deeply. Charlotte stopped breathing. Then Damien lowered the glass without taking a sip. He turned his head slowly, his dark, piercing eyes locking onto hers. The silence in the room stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. "You're sweating, Ms. Jenkins," Damien said softly. Charlotte froze. Her blood turned to ice. "He knows my name." Charlotte couldn't speak. Her tongue felt glued to the roof of her mouth. How did he know her name? I apologize, sir." She stammered, her voice barely a squeak. "It's very hot in the kitchen." Damien didn't look away. His gaze roamed over her face, taking in her flushed, rounded cheeks, the terrified wide eyes, and the rapid rise and fall of her chest. There was no disgust in his expression, no dismissal, just a cold, terrifying curiosity. "Matteo," Damien murmured, not breaking eye contact with Charlotte. "Leave us." Matteo looked surprised but nodded instantly. "Yes, boss." The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Charlotte entirely alone with the deadliest man in Chicago. Damien set the wine glass back down on the table. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. "Anthony Morello is a predictable man." He began, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "He thinks he's clever, using civilian leverage. He found out your brother Lucas owed him 200 grand. He figured a chef with access to my food, a woman who blends into the background, would be the perfect assassin." Charlotte's knees buckled. She couldn't help it. Her legs gave out, and she hit the plush carpeted floor with a heavy thud, her silver tray clattering beside her. She began to weep, deep, agonizing sobs shaking her entire body. "Please," she begged, looking up at him through her tears. "Please don't kill my brother. I didn't want to do it. They said they would mail him to me in pieces. Please, Mr. Moretti, I'm so sorry." Damien stood up slowly. He walked around the edge of the mahogany table and knelt in front of her. For a moment, Charlotte squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the bullet, waiting for a knife. Instead, she felt a large, warm hand cup her cheek. Her eyes flew open in shock. Damien's thumb gently brushed away a tear tracking down her face. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to his fearsome reputation. "You are not like the women who usually occupy my world, Charlotte," he said quietly, his eyes dropping to her trembling lips before meeting her gaze again. "The women I know are sharp, starved, ruthless, They would have poisoned me and smiled while I choked. His hand slid down to her jaw, his thumb pressing lightly into the soft flesh of her neck. You are soft. You're shaking like a leaf, and yet you still poured the glass. I had to, she whispered, a fresh tear spilling over his hand. I love him. Damien let out a low hum, a sound of contemplation. He stood up towering over her and walked back to the table. He picked up the poisoned glass of wine. I knew about Morello's plan 3 days ago, Damien stated calmly. I had Dominic Castiglione intercepted 10 minutes after he handed you the vial. I know exactly what is in this glass. Aconite. A nasty, painful way to go. Charlotte stared at him bewildered. If you knew, why did you let me pour it? A dangerous, predatory smile curved Damien's lips. Because I needed to see if you actually had the nerve to do it. And you did. He tilted his head, studying her. Stand up, Charlotte. She scrambled to her feet, her legs feeling like jelly. She wiped her damp cheeks with the sleeve of her chef's coat, feeling incredibly self-conscious. She was a fat, sweaty, crying mess in front of a billionaire mob boss in a tailored suit. I am in a very precarious position, Damien said, pacing slowly. The feds are breathing down my neck. My legitimate business front's real estate imports are being audited. I need a distraction. More importantly, I need a shield, an alibi. To the public, I am a ruthless gangster. I need to soften my image. Charlotte blinked, trying to keep up. I don't understand. I need a wife, Damien said bluntly. A woman completely disconnected from the life. A civilian. Someone who looks innocent, harmless. He gestured toward her. A sweet, plump, hard-working pastry chef who clearly loves her family enough to commit murder for them. You are the perfect candidate. Charlotte's jaw dropped. A wife? Yes, he replied. And here is my offer. You will marry me tomorrow at City Hall. You will play the part of a devoted, adoring wife for the press, the police, and my rivals. In exchange, I will wipe out Lucas's debt. In fact, I'll wipe out Anthony Morello entirely. Your brother will be safe, and you will be protected under my name. You want me to marry you? She repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. But I just tried to kill you. Which is why I know you take direction well when properly motivated. Damien shot back, his eyes flashing. And let's be clear, Charlotte. This isn't a request. This is an ultimatum. He stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. The scent of sandalwood and danger rolled off him. He looked down at her, his gaze sweeping over her full figure, lingering on the curves hidden beneath the bulky white coat. If you say no, he whispered, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet, I will let Morello do whatever he wants. To your brother, and then I will handle you for attempting to murder me in my own territory. Charlotte stared into his dark eyes. There was no bluff in them. He was dead serious. He was forgiving her for trying to assassinate him, but the price of that forgiveness was her freedom. She would be tethered to a monster, forced into a gilded cage. But Lucas would live. Okay. She breathed the word, barely escaping her lips. I'll do it. I'll marry you. Damien's hard expression cracked into a genuine, satisfied smirk. He reached out his hand, wrapping firmly around her thick waist, pulling her flush against his solid chest. Charlotte gasped at the sudden, intimate contact. Good girl, he murmured against her ear. He reached over with his free hand, picked up the glass of poisoned wine, and walked it over to a potted fern in the corner, pouring the deadly liquid into the soil. Pack your things, Charlotte Jenkins, Damien ordered, turning back to her with a possessive glint in his eye. Tomorrow you become a Moretti, and God help anyone who tries to poison what is mine. Follow-up. Are you ready to see how Charlotte handles her first night in Damien's heavily guarded mansion, and how she navigates a world of beautiful, dangerous mob wives who see her as nothing but a fat, temporary joke? The ink on their marriage license was barely dry before Charlotte found herself thrust into a world she had only ever seen in movies. There was no grand ceremony, no white dress. Just the stark, echoing halls of the Cook County Clerk's office, guarded by 4 men with hidden firearms, and the cold, heavy weight of a 6-carat emerald-cut Cartier diamond resting on her plump finger. Damien's estate in Lake Forest was less of a home and more of a fortress. It was a sprawling Gothic revival mansion, built of dark stone, overlooking the grey churning waters of Lake Michigan. Inside, it was a museum of cold marble antique weaponry and oppressive silence. For the first 3 days, Charlotte hid in the massive state-of-the-art kitchen. It was the only place she felt safe, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of kneading dough and reducing sauces, drawing inspiration from culinary giants like Chef Grant Katz to keep her mind off the heavily armed men patrolling the gardens. But a mob boss's wife could not hide forever. On Friday evening, Damien hosted a casual gathering for the inner circle of the syndicate. It was a test, Charlotte knew, a way to parade his new harmless civilian wife in front of his lieutenants, to prove he was settling down while secretly masking his ongoing war against the remnants of the Morello family. Charlotte stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her lavish new bedroom. She wore a deep emerald green gown by Oscar de la Renta, a dress Damien had specifically ordered for her. It clung to her heavy breasts, cinched her thick waist, and flowed elegantly over her wide hips and heavy thighs. She looked beautiful, but she felt like a very expensive piece of bait. When she descended the grand staircase, the low hum of conversation in the foyer instantly died. The men wearing custom suits and calculating expressions evaluated her with thinly veiled confusion. But it was the women who were truly terrifying. Standing by the grand fireplace were Camilla Bianchi Matteo's wife and Sofia Russo. They were razor-thin, their faces pulled tight by the best surgeons in Chicago, draped in diamonds and dripping with condescension. As Damien stepped forward, wrapping a possessive heavy arm around Charlotte's thick waist to draw her into the room, Camilla smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her cold, predatory eyes. So this is the new Mrs. Moretti. Camilla purred her gaze, raking over Charlotte's soft, full figure with overt disdain. We were all so surprised, Damien. She isn't your usual taste. Sophia let out a soft, mocking laugh. It's certainly a bold choice. Tell us, Charlotte, darling, how did you catch his eye? Did you eat the competition? A hot flush of humiliation crept up Charlotte's neck. She looked down at the marble floor, her old insecurities screaming at her to run back to the kitchen. She was just a fat, terrified sous chef. She didn't belong with these vipers. Before she could shrink away, Damien's grip on her waist tightened his fingers, pressing firmly into her plush hip. The air in the room suddenly grew frigid. My wife, Damien began, his voice deadly quiet, caught my eye because she possesses something none of you will ever understand. Genuine loyalty. He looked directly at Camilla, his obsidian eyes unblinking. And as for my taste, Camilla, I prefer a woman who actually feels like a woman under my hands, not a starving, fragile bird that would snap if I squeezed too hard. The silence that followed was suffocating. Camilla swallowed hard, her heavily powdered face turning pale. Sophia stepped back, suddenly finding her champagne glass fascinating. Damien turned his gaze down to Charlotte. Right in front of his deadliest enforcers and their cruel wives, He lifted his free hand, tangling his fingers in her dark curls, and tilted her face up. He pressed a slow, deliberate, and undeniably hot kiss to her lips. It wasn't just for show. Charlotte felt the genuine heat, the dark, twisted hunger in his kiss. He liked her body. He wanted her. "Enjoy the caviar, ladies," Damien murmured against Charlotte's lips before looking back at the pale women. "My wife hand-selected it." But the victory was short-lived. Later that night, as the party dwindled, Charlotte slipped away to fetch a glass of water from the kitchen. As she passed the shadowed doorway of Damien's study, she heard hushed, urgent voices. "Morello isn't dead," Matteo Bianchi was hissing to someone on the phone. "Damien lied. He wiped out the lieutenants, but Anthony is hiding in the south side. Yes, I have the drops. The gala at the Drake Hotel tomorrow night. I'll make sure it's done." Charlotte pressed her hand to her mouth, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Matteo, Damien's most trusted underboss. He was the traitor, and he was planning to finish the job Charlotte had failed to do. The Syndicate Charity Gala at the Drake Hotel was the social event of the season, a glittering facade masking the brutal reality of Chicago's underworld. Hundreds of politicians, socialites, and mobsters mingled under the massive crystal chandeliers of the Gold Coast room. Charlotte sat beside Damien at the head table, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her chest. She had tried to tell Damien about what she heard in the study, but he had been locked in back-to-back meetings all day. Now, surrounded by hundreds of people, she was trapped. She watched Matteo out of the corner of her eye. The underboss was slick. Charming, the mayor's wife, but his eyes kept darting back to Damien. When the main course was cleared, the servers began distributing the after-dinner digestives. A line of waiters carried silver trays lined with crystal shot glasses of limoncello, a traditional Italian palate cleanser. Charlotte's culinary instincts, honed through years of high-pressure kitchen service, immediately kicked in. She watched the waiter approach their table. He handed a glass to Matteo, one to Camilla, one to Charlotte, and finally one to Damien. Matteo stood up, tapping his silver spoon against his glass. The grand ballroom quieted down. To our boss, Damien Moretti, Matteo called out his voice, booming over the microphone, and to his beautiful new bride, "May your reign be long, and your lives be filled with fortune. Salute." "Salute," the room echoed. Damien picked up his glass. He gave Charlotte a rare, genuine smile, his eyes softening as he looked at her. He raised the glass toward his lips. Charlotte's gaze snapped to Matteo. The underboss wasn't drinking. He was staring at Damien's glass, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple, his breathing shallow. He has the drops. Matteo had poisoned the limoncello. Damien tilted his head back to drink. "Stop!" Charlotte screamed, her voice tearing through the elegant silence of the ballroom. Before Damien could react, Charlotte lunged across the heavy damask tablecloth. With her full weight, she slammed her hand into Damien's wrist. The crystal glass shattered against the floor, splashing the sticky yellow liquid across the polished hardwood and onto the hem of Damien's trousers. The ballroom erupted in gasps. Half a dozen of Damien's armed guards instantly drew their weapons, scanning the room for a threat. Damien grabbed Charlotte by the shoulders, his eyes wild with fury and confusion. "What the hell are you doing, Charlotte?" She was panting, her chest heaving against her tight corset. She pointed a trembling finger straight at Matteo Bianchi. "It's poisoned! Matteo poisoned it! He's working for Anthony Morello." Matteo's face contorted into a mask of pure panic. "She's lying. The fat bitch is crazy, boss. She's the one who tried to poison you a week ago." "I heard him on the phone last night." Charlotte pushed on her voice, steadying, as the adrenaline surged through her veins. He said Morello was in the south side. He said he had the drops. She looked down at the spilled limoncello. Smell it, Damien. Limoncello is made with lemon zest sugar and vodka. It should smell bright and sweet. That smells like bitter almonds. It's cyanide. Damien froze. He slowly looked down at the puddle at his feet. The distinct faint and deadly aroma of bitter almonds wafted up into the air. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. Damien slowly stood up from the table, brushing a drop of the spilled liquid from his sleeve. His face was a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. "Matteo," Damien said softly. The sound of his voice made the entire ballroom hold its breath. Matteo didn't wait. He shoved his chair back, pulling a snub-nosed revolver from his jacket, and aimed it right at Damien's chest. "Morello sends his regards." Bang! Matteo's sentence was cut short as a red blossom exploded on his forehead. He crumpled to the ground, dead, before he hit the carpet. Standing 10 feet away, Damien lowered his smoking, suppressed pistol. The room was trapped in a horrified, stunned silence. Damien calmly placed the gun back into his shoulder holster and turned to his guards. "Clean this up. Find Anthony Morello in the south side. Burn him to the ground." He turned back to Charlotte. She was shaking violently, clutching the edge of the table to keep herself upright. Without a word, Damien scooped her up into his arms. Despite her weight, he lifted her effortlessly, carrying her away from the chaos out of the ballroom and up into the private penthouse suite of the Drake Hotel. He kicked the heavy oak doors shut behind them and set her down gently on the edge of the massive king-sized bed. Charlotte covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The violence, the stress, the absolute terror of the last week had finally broken her. I thought he was going to kill you." She wept, her shoulders shaking. Damien knelt in front of her, just as he had done in the VIP room a week ago. But this time there was no cold calculation in his eyes, only a burning, possessive fire. He pulled her hands away from her face, gripping her thick wrists gently. "You saved my life," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You a civilian, a sous chef who makes pastries. You threw yourself across a table to save a monster. You're my husband." She sniffled, looking into his dark eyes. "I couldn't let him hurt you." Damien groaned a deep, guttural sound. He stood up, pulling her up with him, and crushed his mouth against hers. This kiss wasn't a show for the vipers. It was raw, desperate, and completely consuming. He tasted like expensive scotch and danger. His large hands mapped her body, tracing the heavy curve of her hips, the soft roll of her stomach, worshipping the very flesh that the world had told her to be ashamed of. "You are mine, Charlotte," he rasped against her throat, his lips leaving a trail of fire down her skin. "No more fake marriage. No more arrangements. You are my queen. And I swear to God I will burn down this entire city to keep you safe." As he pushed her gently back onto the plush mattress, the cold, ruthless Mafia boss finally surrendered to the woman who had dared to poison his wine. Charlotte wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, pulling him down into her warmth. She had walked into the darkness to save her brother, but in the arms of the devil himself, she had found her light. Did Charlotte and Damien's deadly romance leave you breathless? If you loved this intense story of betrayal, food and Mafia intrigue, hit that like button and share it with your fellow romance drama addicts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling, real-life inspired tale. Drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in Charlotte's shoes. Stay tuned for more gripping stories coming your way.